Hi again, everyone. I'm Patrick Pfingsten from the Illinoize. Happy to be joined by two of our newest state senators in Illinois for our political roundtable discussion. Happy to be joined by Senator Cristina Pacione-Zayas from the northwest side of Chicago. She replaced Senator Iris Martinez, who became Cook County Circuit Clerk at the end of 2020. And also happy to be joined by Senator Sally Turner, who is the replacement for Senator Bill Brady. She's from Logan County. Represents an area from Bloomington south to Springfield to almost Peoria, and she took his seat in early January, mid-January. So, senators, thank you, Senator Pacione-Zayas. Since you have the seniority by like 2 weeks, I'll let you go first. Why did you want to do this, and kind of what's your background and interest in getting into this morass that we call state government?
Well, I have been dancing around the area of state government because I have been in advocacy and I am a student of educational policy. My doctorate is in educational policy from our land grant institution, University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And ever since, actually during that process, I got involved in working in community-based organizations and public schools to really maximize learning opportunities for young people and communities. And so when this opportunity presented itself after kind of consulting with mentors and community leaders, and of course the family and my employer at the time, it just seemed like it was definitely a good timing piece, particularly because we often talk about in policy that if you're not at the table, you are on the menu. And my objective is to really bring the lived experiences and voices of individuals who not only live and work in the 20th legislative district, but across the entire state who don't always have an avenue into government.
Senator Turner, your background is heavily in government. You spent what 6 terms as county clerk in Logan County. That's quite a record, quite the accomplishment. What brought you back into the fray?
Kind of the same reason as Senator just mentioned. When you're county clerk for that many years, it's all about service and service to others. And I noted the continual need to reach out to my local taxing districts, schools, parks, libraries, townships, road districts. All of those individuals in those settings still needed representation. And I worked well with all of them. And I think there's so many needs that they have. It made me see that my job that I had left wasn't quite finished. It's just a different facet of it. And so to continue on in public service was what I saw what the need was at the time. And I submitted my application and they chose me. So, and I love the analogy you made about it. If you're not at the table, you're not on the menu, or you're on the menu. That was so cool. I love that.
See, we're already building bipartisanship. We're like 2 minutes in. I like it. So, Senator Turner, and actually, this could be for both of you. I think we're now in mid-February. We're recording this on the 15th, and you haven't been in the Senate chamber for session yet. Senator Pacione-Zayas, you've had what, 3 or 4 days over lame duck session. Have you, and when you're appointed, you don't get the same startup resources that someone who's elected does. You don't get the school and the handbooks and all that stuff that helps with a newly elected member. So Senator Turner, I'll start with you. How hard has it been to get ramped up, especially when you don't have, the resources and the time in Springfield to kind of get your feet under you?
Well, I will say that I've had a small advantage, and that is that I only live about 40 miles to Springfield. So I've been able to go in and visit with my legislative aide, Barb, who is fabulous. She just knows the ins and outs and how to contact the right agencies for different issues. So that's been really helpful. And then I've had some outreach from some of the other senators, just to say welcome, and if you need any help, just let me know. So that I appreciate all of that. But as for getting in depth into policy, into bills, you're definitely correct. I'm behind on that because I don't have everything at my fingertips, of which I'm used to having. And I'm also used to having the control of what I see all the time. And that is difficult.
And Senator Pacione-Zayas, I worked in the Senate on staff for a little while, and it took me months and months, I think, to find the bathrooms. Does 3 or 4 days of legislative session really give you much of a feeling of head start or being all set to go?
Well, I had the advantage of being an advocate. And so when I would, when I worked for the Latino Policy Forum, when I worked for Enlace Chicago, and also for Erickson, I would go to Springfield, and I happened to be nursing at the time. And so I got very intimate with the bathrooms. I needed to know where the outlets were. So I was able to kind of maneuver. I'm learning Springfield in a different way, right? Like certain staircases that kind of get you quickly into the chamber. So, those types of tips are great. And I love that because it's, kind of like a little bit of a scavenger hunt. So I've got that. And just like Senator Turner, I have an amazing legislative assistant. She has been, she had served Senator Martinez for her 18 years. So she has, tons of institutional knowledge, incredibly informed and effective. And, we've just had a regular cadence of, we check in daily at 5:15 just to kind of run through things with my district chief of staff. So, we have some structures in place so that I can, leverage, even though I'm not there, but still kind of get caught up to speed. And it helped too that I was on the State Board of Education, and I had sort of a stakeholder engagement strategy that I'm starting to apply in this context. That is helping me with kind of navigating the analysis of bills and also the formulation of bills.
Senator Pacione-Zayas, obviously education is going to be high on your list. I'm sure, Latino issues obviously are those that are important, especially as we're trying to get a vaccine out to underserved communities. And we'll talk about COVID in a few minutes, but I guess walk through, priorities, what you want to see done, obviously for your community, but also in the statewide view in general.
Sure. I think there's, just like any community, it doesn't matter what the demographics or the population is. There's some core elements that need to be in place. And so, as you mentioned, education is one of my priority areas, and very specifically early childhood. Because the first 5 years of life are just instrumental for the life trajectory. Health, obviously, because of the COVID influence, but also all of the influences that health have on your other life outcomes. Housing, affordability particularly, and preserving, folks being able to stay in their apartments and homes, especially with the loss of economic resources. Workforce and small businesses, really fortifying our mom and pop shops, and really the economic heartbeat of our communities. And then particularly in Chicago, although this happens, you see this in other places, in some of the research I was doing back at Erickson, violence reduction. We have an issue of that. We really need to think about how do we approach that in ways that are more restorative and healing, and getting at the root causes of why violence actually occurs. So those are the 5 areas that I'll be looking at deeply. But what I've charged my stakeholders as we're starting to kind of look at solutions is revenue. We need to start thinking about revenue in different ways because of our structural deficit and because of some of the recent borrowing we've done to plug the holes within our budget. So I just don't want to be talking about, you know, how we need to spend more, but I also want to think about how we need to be more effective in our spending and also come up with creative ways to generate revenue.
Do you support a personal or corporate income tax increase right now?
I supported the progressive tax when it was presented because I think there's so many other things that contributes to with respect to stability and housing in our economy. And so I think we're going to just have to look at different ways that we'll be able to make up for the fact that we were not able to be successful in the passage of that.
You know, Senator Turner, when Senator Pacione-Zayas talks about small businesses and economic hardship, I think about small towns all throughout the state. I mean, you live near one, I grew up in one, you know, where many people are barely paycheck to paycheck. It's interesting to see, you know, these are issues Democrats and Republicans are speaking the same language on.
Absolutely. There were so many things that I was right there with you, shaking my head. Your feelings are exactly mine as well. And job creation and then sustainability of jobs, those are both just such important things. And in this time of COVID, it's just overwhelming sometimes. And not just necessarily for those individuals that are that have the businesses, but the community that's around them that they're not able to get their shots. And, you know, we really have to push hard with that. And I think everyone is in agreement with that part. And I know you said we're going to talk about COVID too in a little bit. And also Senator mentioned about the budget. Yep, there's lots of holes that need to be filled. And there's lots of different ways that we need to look at how can we increase revenue in different ways. And what are the things that we could take away and supplant with something else. Another thing I guess that I like to pay attention to because of local government is unfunded mandates. Those are things that are really tough on local government. And those are things that we need to look at before we pass laws to see how are those going to affect a county or a local government that they can't afford those unless there's something tied to it.
Let's talk about that state budget issue first for a minute. Senator Pacione-Zayas said she supported the progressive tax or the graduated income tax. I would assume you opposed it. I would assume you oppose any tax hike at this point. What, you know, Republicans have not come to the table with line items of cuts that they would support, they would vote for. They've basically thrown up their hands and said, Democrats, you got into this mess, it's on you. What should the Republican Party, what should your caucus, what should your side in general say when it comes to balancing the budget? If you're not going to raise taxes and you're not going to support specific cuts, you know, what do you stand for in that sense?
Well, first of all, I personally would say that it wasn't Democrats that put us in this hole. It was everyone, and it's been going on for a long time. So I wouldn't do any finger pointing. I'd say it's a cohesive mess. And as for digging out of it, I can't say that I personally have gone through the entire budget to try and research and see what I feel. What I feel are specific things that I see that need to be changed. I mean, in the past, the way I reviewed a county budget was that I would go through and see where are we having expenditures that aren't needed. And I think the same way needs to be gone through in a state budget as well. More meticulous crafting of an accounting to make sure that we're not overspending in certain areas and that we are spending in areas that are much needed.
How did you feel about the governor's plan to decouple some business tax credits from the CARES Act that businesses said would have cost them around the state, you know, in excess of $500 million, while they're tax breaks that were never promised by the state, they are breaks that would help business and many businesses in Bloomington, in Springfield, in Lincoln. What would be your thought on those CARES Act tax breaks?
Well, when you say regarding the CARES Act tax breaks, what do you mean by that exactly?
Well, no, it was the governor's bill that was voted down in the House right at the end of the lame duck session. That, you know, the CARES Act put a whole bunch of tax credits in, deductions in for business that the governor wanted to decouple from. That you know, the state would not have given the same tax credit for you know, for extended losses. Obviously, in a year where businesses are going to have quite a few losses, you know, I think the position of the business community was that, you know, we need all the help we can get to keep our doors open, but, you know, the governor's office is saying we don't have a choice, because this was never our policy, never our plan. You know, and maybe not specifically to that bill, because who knows what it's going to look like now. But, you know, should the state be giving these kind of tax breaks, quote unquote, at a time when state government has such a gigantic hole?
Well, I think we have to look at, well, how are businesses performing right now? And perhaps if that's something that can help lift businesses up, if that's what they need to get their feet in their cement so that they can continue on and continue to employ other individuals that are in their business, I think that's really an important step that we need to take. And again, I don't want to speak out of turn, because if I haven't investigated something to the best of my ability, I don't want to say one thing or another in support or not supporting something. I want to have everything in front of me so that I can review that and be able to speak knowledgeably about it.
And Senator Pacione-Zayas, that bill never even made it over to the Senate, because it failed in the House. I don't know, what was that, 2 a.m. or whatever. I was on the House side. I didn't even get over to you guys during lame duck session. But when it comes to those CARES Act tax breaks or other, you know, I guess the term that the governor's office is using ahead of his budget address later this week is loopholes, though there haven't been a lot of discussion about those. Should the state be winding back those sort of things?
Well, there's been a few briefings on it. And I think what's important to acknowledge is that, you know, the how this worked in terms of the CARES Act is that there was some, you know, opportunity for corporations to be able to record losses for the past 5 years.
Mhm.
And so what they're projecting is potentially $500 million in returns, because what they're looking at is that when there are some net operating losses for corporations that make more than $250,000, there could be some significant payouts that we have to do. And so it really, and because Illinois is one of those states that when there are federal kind of tax breaks like that, then we follow through as a state. And so my understanding, at least with this briefing, what they were explaining is that 35 other states have decoupled to be able to kind of account for this. Including states that are governed by Republican governors. And it's not removing the benefits entirely. It's just saying that you can't claim the losses for the past 5 years, but moving forward, you can still do that. And so it's just one of the, I think, pieces that they're putting out there as the menu of options in terms of cost savings with the budgets and being able to plug some holes. And so one of my questions in the briefings, where I really would like to see, because I am a data person and I'm a data visualizer, is I had asked, can we get a map so that we can see kind of dot points where these particular corporations that would meet that threshold, where they actually are located across the state, so we can kind of get a sense of what geographies are going to be hit the hardest. And if we had to explain this to our constituents, we would then have that really concrete, detailed information. So I'm still waiting on that. Because a couple other senators had asked about that with respect to some corporations within their geographies that they had some concerns about, because we know that there could be some, other kind of implications for the workforce and for the local economy. And so I think we need to, like Senator Turner said, we have to have all the information in front of us before we can make these types of decisions. And the more data that we have that's precise will really help us in being able to make some informed decisions.
So Senator Pacione-Zayas, your district is kind of that Albany Park, Irving Park area on the northwest side. COVID has impacted everyone. I think we know that. Obviously Albany Park is known for a high Latino population. I'm not completely sure on Albany Park or Irving Park, pardon me, but the mandates, the business closures, the school closures, all the way up to the vaccine rollout. There have been different levels that folks have been frustrated with either the state or federal government, or I guess in Chicago's case, CPS or Chicago Teachers Union, et cetera. How do we get through this? Because obviously the vaccine rollout has just been incredibly difficult in terms of supply and trying to find it. The people who are still, not being able to go to work because their kids aren't going to school. It has had to impact you all in a serious fashion in your district. What's your assessment of how this has been handled by the governor, et cetera, IDPH, and what could and should the state be doing better?
So I will say, the district is incredibly diverse. While we are majority Latinx, and we have like about 8 community areas, not only Albany Park, but also Avondale, Logan Square, Hermosa, Humboldt Park, Portage Park, Irving Park, as you mentioned. We also have a sizable Polish immigrant population, as well as Asian and Native American and Middle Eastern. I mean, it is really United Nations in the 20th district. And you're right in the sense that there have been areas that have been hit incredibly hard because we have preponderance of pre-existing conditions that can, have a more acute effect of COVID. We have less access to high quality healthcare. We tend to be essential workers. So we are cooking the meals and cleaning the buildings and driving the buses. And then we also live in intergenerational households. And to your point, in terms of what should and could have been done in a more kind of precise and deliberate way, is to really always develop a plan with the individuals who are going to be affected the most. And so it's not to say that, at the state level and the city level, that this has been a complete miss of the mark. Because I mean, trust me, I don't envy them at all for being in this position. But at the same time, there have been opportunities where they could be more targeted. What I mean by that is I particularly took a very strong stance against the reopening of or returning to in-person learning in Chicago public schools because it was more of a universal plan. It assumed that across the city, we were all experiencing the same thing with COVID. And we had, particularly in 60639, double-digit infection rates that are very different in the northeast side of Chicago, or some or the central area. And so one of my main points to CPS is, you say that this plan is anchored in equity. Well, equity says that you don't give people all the same thing, you give people what they need. And therefore, you have to take a targeted and deliberate approach when you are designing a plan. So what Albany Park needs is very different from what Lincoln Park needs. And so we can't assume that just a blanket reopening is going to solve everybody's problems. In fact, it could exacerbate problems. And, 2/3 of Chicago public school families chose, my family included, my kids are staying home. And I'm going to grin and bear it, but I also know I speak from a position of privilege. Both my husband and I are home. We're both educators. We can support, the remote learning, as crazy as it is, while we're still trying to, attend to our professional responsibilities. But I also know that it's important to value life. And that really was what this kind of discussion is about. How we continue to preserve and value life and put those kinds of values at the center of our decision making. So in terms of the vaccine distribution, that too needs to be more deliberate. I mean, in the Senate hearing last week, I asked the question of Walgreens and CVS, what controls are you putting in place to ensure that individuals who do not live in the community where your pharmacies are do not hijack these vaccines, particularly for our elders who need them the most? And so, they were explaining what they try to do, but I also, sometimes for me with corporations, they have far more resources and ability to be able to put certain things in place. And I gave them some ideas to think through that sometimes state government and local government can't do. And so I think we have to always take this deliberate and targeted approach into how we address this.
That's interesting. That leads me into what I was going to ask you next about COVID, Senator Turner, was the fact that so many folks are having to travel, to be able to get a vaccine, whether it's someone from the suburbs going into the city, or whether it's someone from Lincoln or a smaller community around you, Mount Pulaski, Beeson, your town, to Bloomington or Springfield or Peoria maybe, just to be able to get the vaccine. When it comes from a perspective of maybe your smaller communities, obviously there are more resources in a Sangamon County or a McLean County. How has vaccine access been there, and what has the frustration in the community been like?
Sure. First of all, I want to say you're exactly right, Senator. It needs to be focused, and you hit the nail on the head. And one of the things that I'm noticing in our rural areas, of which where we live, is we have a large majority of elderly folks, a lot of farming folks. They don't have the internet. So first of all, they don't get the news on the internet to look at it and say, I want to schedule an appointment. And they don't have the maybe a neighbor or a family member to get on the internet to schedule an appointment, because they just don't have it. Like I talked to you earlier, right before we started, Senator, I was telling Patrick that I'm sorry if my access goes out on the internet because our internet is so poor. So there's a lot of areas around here it's horrible. You probably can hear I'm delayed anyway. So that outreach to individuals just by the internet was not working here. And then we have a lot of older people in our communities that if they didn't have someone to assist them to call, by the time they got on the telephone to call, all the appointments were filled. So most of what we're seeing for those that have primary care physicians are calling their doctor's offices. And then the scheduling is sometimes going through one of the local clinics that they'll set apart just a time for that 85-year-old person. And they're trying to do it that way. But my conversation with our local health department administrator, he said that when they get the vaccine, it goes well, and they have the appointments, and whatever processes it takes to get that shot in the arm goes well. But their problem is that they don't get notification of when they're getting this onset of vaccines. So they make it on a Wednesday, and they have to hurry up and get it done by Friday. And that seems to be the big problem.
And that goes along with the supply issue. You can't schedule out appointments 2 and 3 and 4 weeks ahead when you don't know how much supply you're going to have week to week. And we just saw at the middle of last week that the state's going to reduce the number of first dose allotments for counties so that they can make up second doses. I think whether that was a projection on they expected to have more by now or not, I think it just has to be frustrating across the board, right? From everyone, whether it's a rural district or an urban district. I mean, it just had the supply issue and the communication issues have to be frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
And Senator Turner, before, I also wanted, I asked Senator Pacione-Zayas about the reaction in the community to all of the things that have happened COVID wise. And obviously they're, in the city, they tend to like to blame the mayor or local officials like that. Downstate, those things fall on the governor. And I've spent plenty of time downstate, even though I live in the suburbs now. And I have to assume that in a lot of small towns, between mask mandates and business closures and school closures and vaccine rollout, I have to have the feeling that Governor Pritzker is kind of public enemy one or number one in areas down there right now.
Yeah, he seems to be getting the brunt of it. And you're right, it's probably because of where we're situated in that central Illinois area. So yeah, that's usually what you see signs in neighborhoods and things of that nature.
Lots of
he probably gets the brunt of it. Yeah.
Is it fair though, in your mind? I mean, obviously, he has taken the position that he's trying to save lives, but also there are a lot of businesses, a lot of restaurants, a lot of people who are having a hard time making ends meet that have been significantly negatively impacted. And I don't think any of us envy his situation, but do you think that he put too much emphasis on the abstract of reducing numbers at the expense of business owners and people who were trying to pay the bills?
Well, I will say I would never want to be in his position, because that is something that no one's ever had to take on before. So, but I will say, I saw a situation in which we had in 2016, we had the cybersecurity on our elections attack, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing we did is we brought out the National Guard. And this is the same avenue I think I would have taken if that were my situation, to seek that resource of the National Guard, because their organization and their structures, I can't even tell you how wonderful they were when we went through that situation for all of our 102 counties. So that's probably a resource that I would have tapped into in more depth. But I don't want to point fingers at anybody, because I know it had to have been a difficult situation that he was placed in. But I wish that we'd step up and grab some more resources in order to do those things, whether it's public resources or governmental resources, I'd like to see business as a resource to help us with this plan as well.
And there have been, plenty of calls for more National Guard to help with the vaccine distribution, whether I think they're only in Cook and Winnebago and St. Clair at this point, but and there have been requests. I know Lake County requested National Guard help, but were denied. So there are plenty of calls about National Guard as we move forward. And we're about out of time, so I don't want to belabor this too long. I know you're both busy and snowed in, so I'm sure your phones are ringing off the hook. So Senator Pacione-Zayas, I'll finish with you. If what's the takeaway? I think we've seen here in our 30 minutes together that you two agree on quite a few things. A quote unquote liberal from the Northwest side and a downstate conservative should we have some hope about politics? I mean, in the world where there are so many divisive figures, your AOCs and Marjorie Taylor Greens, and not even, counting the former president, but, and obviously in the state, there are those too. So should we take some solace in the fact that maybe some of this new blood in the Senate, with all the turnover and the fact that Mike Madigan's gone in the House, that maybe, just maybe, there's some hope for state government?
I think, I think it's important to recognize nobody wakes up and says, I'm going to do bad, right? I think people inherently want to do good. Now, they may disagree on how we get to doing good. There may be some deviation about how we define good. But I think what's incredibly important is for us to constantly be engaged in conversation and to identify where we do have the common ground, because we're not going to agree, and that's okay. But what we have been entrusted to do is to come to the table, to be willing to have those conversations and identify a path forward for our state. And so I just, even within my district, I voted for the Black caucuses for pillars, and specifically the criminal justice reform. And I received outreach from stakeholders that were upset with that vote. And I invited them for a conversation because I said, let's talk about this, because one, I want to make sure that you are coming to me with accurate information. And two, I want to explain to you what informed my decision. And three, I want to offer you an avenue to continue to inform the process. And so while we may not always agree on things, and that happens, obviously across the political ideological spectrum, it does not absolve us from the responsibility of having conversations and determining where there's common ground. So I do think that there is an opportunity as long as we take that type of approach.
Senator Turner, your thoughts on that? I mean, it seems like, maybe we've butted a new friendship across party lines here, and hopefully we can be a part of things like that. But, how do we move this forward without such mean and dispiriting language in politics?
Well, I think exactly what the senator said. It's all about communication. I mean, even with your spouses or your whoever it is that you live with. I mean, this is the same idea. And if we treat each other with kindness, isn't that the whole do unto others? It can be simple, and we can agree to disagree and move on, get jobs done, work together for the good of Illinoisans. And Senator, I wanted to mention, I love your city. My daughter lives in Pilsen.
Awesome. I was just there yesterday.
See, there we go. Senator Cristina Pacione-Zayas and Senator Sally Turner. Senators, welcome. I look forward to seeing you in Springfield eventually when we're back, and hopefully we'll see a productive and fruitful session that actually get some things done. And I hope you're both a part of that.
Thank you, Patrick. Really appreciate the opportunity to have
Thank
this.
you. Thanks for having us.